because we need behavior to survive and thrive. We need to master our behavior. And we use behavior for everything that we do, use, create, sell, learn, practice, grow. We need to understand behavior if we're going to help parent or teach, supervise, support others, and because we have to interact with other people. My goals for this evening are to help you understand why people do what they do or don't, and to help others succeed, motivate others to act, to do something or to not do something, and empower people to complete a task, follow directions, or guide a group. You know, I hear a lot of people in business, individuals, programs, companies talk about obsession with the customer, serving the customer, meeting the customer's needs. Assessing the customer's behavior is assessing their needs. So we'll learn how to help that. And also, all of the things that we learned tonight are not only useful for your job in your role, but at home with your kids or with your spouse, your mother-in-law. So what brings me to tell you about behavior? I started as a computer programmer when I was 12. My first teaching position was 13 in high school, teaching computer science in the computer lab. I was a teacher's aide and helping the students learn how to program because they didn't understand the instructor. I studied anthropology, cultural anthropology, which is essentially how groups of people organize themselves, normalize patterns of behavior, and learn and share information, which is very useful every day. And then I went into teaching. I started teaching kids who had severe emotional and behavioral disorders. Just sort of fell into that. And then also did that work with adults. And for the last 20 years, I've been helping people learn how to de-escalate people who are upset, angry, even violent, with conflict management and physical safety skills around the world. So there's a lot of behavior management that goes into these things. And I've been doing that work as a product manager, which is really the multidisciplinary approach that we've already mentioned so far tonight. We're going to get into a lot of really interesting things that range from biology to physiology, psychology, sociology, leadership, and all other kinds of applications. So what is behavior? Human behavior. This is fascinating stuff. Actually, it's generated from the world's first computer. It's all organic. It's really a central processing unit. We got 5 peripherals. Some say 6. Our skin, people say our skin is actually a 6th sense, like a 6th organ. It operates with electrochemical signals. We're going to get into that. Electrochemical signals. 100% uptime. It's always running, always. Our brain is really a prediction machine. There are hundreds of trillions of synapses in the brain. Synapses are where neurons connect together, and the signal is passed between them. And this is where all the action happens, and all these synapses serve different purposes. And they're not hardwired. They're able to change and adapt and use it or lose it. We are constantly receiving information. 40 billion sensory inputs per second. Yet we're only aware of 40 at a time. Did you know you're aware of 40 sensations right now? Which is a much more manageable number than 40 billion. And so because of this, our brains are tuned to ignore things. Ignore things that are predictable, that are normal, that aren't changed, and it's tuned to notice what's different. So, for example, what I'd like you to do is close one eye, doesn't matter which. Look down. You see that nose? There's a nose there. Yeah. Okay, now close that, open that eye, close the other eye. See it there? All right, now open both eyes. Where does it go? Where does it go? It's still there. It's turned invisible. And it's because our brain has decided to ignore it. It's one of the reasons why we have two eyes, but also behavior and just thought in general costs a lot. So our brain uses 20% of our blood flow, 20% of our calories every day. Uses up a lot of energy. Okay, so this is amazing. While it's tuned to ignore things like your nose, your amygdala will recognize the face of somebody who is of another race than yourself in 50 milliseconds. That's pretty fast. In contrast, 4 times as long to recognize the emotions on somebody's face. Or we could say a quarter the time to recognize somebody of another race. So, and just for reference, it takes 300, 400 milliseconds to blink your eye, which is also about the same amount of time it takes a baseball to reach the plate from the pitcher's hand. So we are actually racist. We are all racist. We're wired to be racist. And I know everyone likes to say, oh, I'm not racist, but everyone is a racist, huh?
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah. It's what you do about that is really the issue. But evolutionary, are all of these things, all of these ways that our brain works, they're all evolutionary adaptations that are for a reason. It's survival. Everything about our body is about self-preservation, self-defense, function, continuing on. Okay, so, and I don't know how detailed you guys want to, do you want me to use big words or short words or how technical? Okay, anyways. So our brain has we actually have several brains in our head. I know like everyone likes to think we have just one brain that's in our head, but what we call our brain is actually 7 different main organs that have vastly different functions. Evolutionary process grows from the brainstem up to the cerebrum. And most animals all share some of these characteristics here with a hindbrain, a midbrain, and a forebrain. The brainstem is primarily in charge of autonomic functions. So did everyone remember to beat your heart and breathe? Because what happens if you could forget to do that? No, we don't. Our autonomic function does that for us. Also digestion. This right here, this is the cerebellum. It's primarily responsible for balance and motor control. And it has, I believe, 40% of our brain's neurons. Tells you what's important to the brain. Okay, now in the midbrain here, we get into the emotion center and where memories are made and stored. And in particular, we get to this little thing here. It's called the amygdala. It's about the size of an almond. We have 2 of them. There's one on each side. And that's primarily responsible for emotions, for fear. Do you ever get scared, like startled? That's your amygdala saying, hey, survival mode, let's go. In fact, when that happens, there's some 1,400 chemical reactions that occur in your body, instantaneous, just like that. 1,400 chemical reactions. Then as we get upwards here, this is our forebrain, the cerebrum, much larger in humans than any other animal. And this is where we do our thinking, our cognitive functions. All right, so this is important, and then the levels are critical because our behavior tends to channel through these levels. And when we look at behavior and try to assess how things happen or why things didn't happen, this is generally the flow of information and processing that we need to follow. So everything that happens because there's a stimulus that causes it, and then there's a response. So I said our body's all about survival, and ultimately anything that happens is because it's supposed to happen. So what happens if you touch something hot? Your body jerks away. Do you think about that? It just happens. And that all is happening down in this level. For you to be thinking about things, that all happens up in the forebrain. And remember the 40 billion sensory inputs? All of this stuff is getting sorted out too. So a lot of the signals that we're getting are subconscious. Or I shouldn't say a lot, almost all. 40 billion compared to 40 is subconscious. So there's a lot of things happening that we're maybe not quite aware of. Although there's a lot of people who say that, they do meditation, they do a lot of inward directed thinking, and they're getting in touch with these things. And a lot of people think that's, woo-woo, and, how could that be? It's all there. It's all there. It's a matter of what you're paying attention to. And so humans are unique in the animal world in that we have the choice, the power of choice. We choose our action. Most of the animal world is stimulus response. It is set. There's no, well, let me think about that. What if I do this or what if I do that? That all comes from having this big cerebrum. There's two general modes of behavior. And so here we're getting into vocabulary. You're going to see these words quite a bit. Respondent behavior and operant behavior. So respondent is also, you could think of that as reflexive. It's something you can't control. It just happens. And operant is instrumental. It's intentional. You are directing self-determination versus self-preservation. There's the electrical signals, but then there's also the chemical signals, which are called hormones. And those are directly responsible for organ-to-organ communication throughout the body. So this is why I call it OMAM. And there's a lot of hormones that you may hear of. What are some hormones that you hear of all the time? Estrogen, testosterone, yep. In the behavior realm, there's cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine. Have you heard of these? These are the common names for those. And we're going to encounter some of these later on. So why have a stress hormone? Why have something that causes us stress? Self-preservation. And how does that preserve us? If we're stressed about something, we want to avoid it in the future. Excellent, Nora. It's exactly right. It's motivation. Stress is motivation. Although if you ask some people and about some issues, it's really demotivation. This is like, oh God, this is like such a bummer. I just want to take a nap and drink a beer and check my Facebook and watch some YouTube. But really, the whole point of stress is it's a signal. It's an urgency to do something about something because it needs to get resolved. Some of the stressor is subconscious. Some of it is conscious. Given those numbers we were looking at before, what do you think the chances are of much consciousness of our stresses? So this will tell you, like, for as much stress as we might perceive that we have, how much more we have that is subconscious. So really the problem is unmanaged stress. That's basically ignoring the fire alarm and not doing anything about it. Dr. Lazarus, who has studied stress extensively, defines stress as your perception of your ability to cope. Look at that word perception. Stress is your perception of your ability to cope. Why is that word there, perception? It's subjective, yes. So being late isn't the problem, isn't the stress. It's your feelings about it that is the stress. Okay? The thing that somebody else is doing, that isn't the stress. The stress is your feelings about what that person is doing. Stress is actually a good thing because it tells us something has to be done about something. The context of what's happening can range from just a few seconds before the issue, such as, touching something hot or somebody, doing something. That's the environmental sensory stimulus. Could be just a few seconds to a few minutes beforehand. It could have been generated by hormones days before. It could be even genetically passed on to you by your elders because of the thing they had a problem with hundreds of years ago that they bore into their children who carried that into their children. It's called epigenetics. Your parents are always modeling to you how to deal with things. And we'll see later why we learn those lessons even when they don't think they're trying to teach us lessons. There's a study you may have heard about recently done on judges who evaluated parolees for parole. And they looked at how many were given parole and how many were not given parole. And they mapped them all out on the day, and they found out that prisoners were granted parole at a rate of 60% right after lunch, 0% before lunch. Okay, that's really bad. Why is that? What's bad about that? The researchers interviewed the judges. They weren't even aware of that bias. So it's not a bias, it's an influence. And it's just, I bring it up just to help you understand that behavior is muddy. We're going to get into a lot of rules and a lot of things you can count on, but there's so many different layers. And we've already covered the biology, the physiology, the survival mechanism, all of these things. And it goes to show that there are so many things that influence our behavior we're not even aware of. Which is pretty much the premise of this book. It's an awesome book. Okay, consequences. So for every action, there is a reaction. For every behavior, there is a consequence. Okay, this is one of the things that defines behaviors. There is a consequence. And consequence is a word that trips up a lot of people. They think that means punishment. To many people, the consequence basically is a word for punishment. That means punishment. By consequence, that means there's a result. Something happens. But this is one of the things that we want to keep in mind. What this also teaches us, though, that the corollary is that every behavior has a purpose. So, hey, let's define behavior because we're talking about behavior. So, behavior is an action taken in response to something to accomplish a specific purpose. This is my definition. There are a lot of definitions out there, and you're going to get a different definition if you ask a biologist, if you ask a sociologist, if you ask a behavioral psychologist, if you ask a UX design or a UI designer. So there's lots of different arenas where we're talking about behavior, lots of different perspectives. Today we're coming at it from a humanistic point of view. We're dealing with other people, and we're going to use a humanistic point of view. So, more critical vocabulary then. Behavior is an action taken in response to something that accomplishes a specific purpose. So the word antecedent is used to indicate that something caused this behavior to occur. And if we have a behavior, we have a consequence. So here's your ABC of behavior: antecedent, behavior, consequence. You'll hear people talk about like, oh, he just did that for no reason. There is always a reason. He might not even know why. There's always a reason. And there's always a need. Behavior is done to meet a need. And all behavior is performed to get something or to avoid something. So these are three of the primary rules that you're going to want to know to be a behavior expert. All behavior happens for a reason. All behavior meets a need. And all behavior is to get or avoid something. Okay, don't set down those pens, because if you're going to define behavior, you need to understand that the way you define it, behavior is objective, observable, and measurable. So objective, you can clearly define it, describe it. If you're having a discussion with somebody or a group of people, or you're writing it in your user story, everybody will understand it. Nobody will misunderstand it. Observable means that you can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it. It's concrete, tangible. So it's not a feeling. It's not someone's intention. It's not their desire. And measurable, you can tell if it's not happening. You can tell if it's happening, how often it's happening, how long it's happening, how intermittently it's happening. So, Nora, when you're thinking about, I want to make sure we're all clear about what we're talking about, what's going to happen here. If you describe this in ways that are objective, observable, and measurable, you should be good to go. There should be no misunderstanding. Some misunderstandings reveal that we weren't talking about a behavior, we were talking about a desire, or a feeling, or an intention, or an emotion, or a misgiving, a hope. A behavior is not an inaction. It's not an omission. The not doing something is not behavior. So when you are not choosing something, what are you doing? Can you describe what you're not doing when you're not choosing something? So when you're defining behavior, you want to be able to describe it so well that anybody who reads your document will understand. In some circles, this is called the stranger test. A stranger will understand it, will get it. They'll have the whole picture. They'll have the same idea about it that you do because you have defined it very concretely. Yes, Ron?
Will you be sharing the slide deck?
Yes. No. You do need to scribble the really important stuff, though. You do need to scribble the really important stuff. It has stars, but yeah. This will be shared out. How long is it? How long does it happen? How long does it last? What's the how much effort is exerted? How often does it occur? How long does it last? What's the interval between the times it happens? Where does it occur? Where does it not occur? When does it not occur? What's the purpose of it? This is maybe one of the most important questions there. These are really, these are actually the same domains as UX domains. And these are also really critical issues in any product or program design or engineering stage. You get really specific around what it is people should be doing, should not be doing, or what it is we need to enable them to do. I cringe every time I read an app description that leads with the words, this app enables you to. And I've used many apps where they said it enabled me to do this thing, but I could not figure out how to do that thing. So I consulted the documentation, which did not help me at all because it was either missing or it was engineering documentation. The let me pull up an example real quick. The display option pull down switch allows you to pick the display option. Yeah, every copy machine in the world is written that way. Little waypoint here. We've covered a lot of biology and physiology. We're going to get into some psychology and sociology and some leadership, some current events. And I've got the hardcore behavior conditioning stuff at the end. It's technical, so I didn't know how technical people would want. No one can make you do anything. This means that you cannot make anyone else do anything. And if you have kids, you really know this lesson. So if you're going to help someone change their behavior, it's best if they want to. It meets their need. That's a hint. Bad behavior, complaints, conflict, these are all an expression of unmet need. So if you learn their need, you can change their behavior. So one of the first lessons that I learned as a teacher is the kid who is acting up, who is not behaving, wasn't because he intended to behave badly is because he didn't know how to behave correctly. And just like we were talking about stressors earlier, when something is amiss that causes stress, which is the sign that something should happen to remedy that. So when people meet their needs, they're happy, right? So we want to succeed with customers. We want to help them meet their needs. There's a book I want to recommend to you. It's called Nonviolent Communication. And it's an approach to communicating with others that is by understanding their feelings and their needs. And coming to learn what those truly are so that you can help them and not transgress them, or you don't understand me, or you're not listening to me, you're not hearing what I'm saying. It's a really profound approach. I think it all comes down to motivation. If you really want to do something, you will work hard for it. This is the first guy to climb Mount Everest. Behavior is really simple, right? I mean, we just saw a stimulus response. It's that simple, right? You just present the stimulus and get right to it. So what is motivation? Why does it matter? What is motivation? Anyone have any ideas?
Alignment of interest.
Alignment of interest. Interesting.
Or, yeah.
Like some anticipation of reward.
Anticipation of reward.
Or desired outcome.
Or a desired outcome, which is the same thing. What about anticipating not having something bad happen?
It's a desired outcome.
That's a desired outcome as well.
Somewhat more generally, a reason for action.
Reason for action. Beautiful. So, motivation comes from the word motive, which means a need that requires satisfaction. People act the way they do because it works for them. Even the woman who was sitting there drinking. People act the way they do because it works for them. Or they don't know a better way. Or because they're getting paid. Or because it just feels better that way.
Well, getting paid and feels better, those are both motivating.
Those are both motivating.
So there's one part, and you still have room, so they may pop up.
What's that?
You still have room on the slide, so it may pop up if there's more. But one motivation is it may not work for them, but it elicits that chemical response.
Which chemical response?
A chemical.
A chemical response, yes.
Dopamine hit.
Dopamine.
Whatever.
Yes.
Pulls cortisol levels down, whatever. It may ultimately not be the right action. Right action in terms of good for me long term, but it gets that immediate response.
Yep. Of 1 billion Facebook users in the world, how many are sitting down to do homework before Facebook? I see a lot of heads shaking. Except for this guy, he's like, I'm not on Facebook, but Snapchat.
So that feels better, maybe. That's that dopamine hit.
Yes, and it turns out this is a very powerful force in the world. Very powerful force. And it's very powerful that we have trouble overcoming it ourselves. And most people's attempts to diet, exercise, do whatever different or what they know should be good for themselves, they can't use willpower to overcome those the hormonal feelings that happen from other things that are better than broccoli. Or they change their mind. So, awesome book. Anyone know Drive? Yes? You like it?
I did.
Excellent. So Dan Pink came up with a really interesting way of defining motivation. And actually, he discovered that through some studies that were being published, that motivation doesn't seem to be working in the way we thought it worked. And why is that? So he went and researched the origin of this to figure out what happened, and I'll tell you why. But so he brings readers through the evolution of motivation, just like we went up the brain stem. Motivation 1.0 is survival instinct, self-preservation. It's all brainstem activity. Motivation 2.0 is getting paid or getting a reward. If you do this, then you'll get this. Carrot and stick. You know that expression? So the thing is, you'd think you pay people more, they'll produce more. Right? That works? You get paid more, you'll produce more, right? What does it depend on, Ron? All right, so researchers went to India, went to a village where they're going to pay them $50, which was like 3 months' wages, to throw balls at a target. And they were not motivated enough to do this whole task. I'm sorry. In that case, the excess of money that was at stake that they could earn fried their brain. They couldn't do it because it was like too powerful of a reward. Somebody mentioned that earlier. There's like too much reward. It turns out by research, the like rote work jobs, those respond very well to rewards. When you get into creative pursuits, where it's like art, marketing, solving big problems, the rewards are actually, they're not motivating, or they cause bad behavior, cheating, ethics violations, shortcuts. Motivation 3.0 is something he's defined, which is value that's derived from pursuing autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Self-directed. There's a lot of companies now that are allowing their employees to work from anywhere. There are companies that are allowing employees to work anytime. Like, they don't have to work a specific number of hours. They don't have to work a specific time on the schedule, or even not even be told what to work on. Like, you ever heard of FedEx days, or they allow the 1% or the 15%, 20%. They let them work on something, for for one day, and some companies, like some of the biggest products or advances that they've achieved have come from people doing little projects on these days when they were just set loose. Atomic Habits. This came out last fall. You heard about this one? And James Clear, author who's really obsessed around productivity and habit building and so forth. And he built a structure for developing habits, which the 4 laws of behavior change are cue, craving, response, and reward. So make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. In his book, he's talking about habits like, studying, being healthier, doing these self-empowering types of things. A behavioral scientist at Stanford University has been working at this for some time, and he has what's commonly known as the BJ Fogg model, which is B equals MAP. In other words, behavior equals motivation, ability, and prompt. So behavior happens when motivation, ability, and prompt all come together at the same moment. Stanford is attended by a lot of people who work in Silicon Valley. One of them was Nir Eyal, who's written a book called Hooked. Through consecutive hook cycles, successful products reach the ultimate goal of unprompted user engagement, bringing users back repeatedly without depending on costly advertising or aggressively messaging. So the holy grail of any app developer is, hey, how can we get our users to just so love our app that they basically don't want to stop using it? I mean, that would be great, right? Well, this four-step model, hook model, trigger, action, variable reward, there's a star for you there around, variable reward, and investment, investing, putting something into it. So like Instagram, you're building up a lot of equity, you know, all the stuff that you put in there, you know, and build it up. So why would you want to leave it? So a lot of app developers have pursued this sort of thing. There's some videos like how Facebook is designed to addict us. And a former Facebook exec has been telling his story for a few years now around how they literally are programming people by exploiting the dopamine and some other things. So some examples that are commonly cited are likes on Facebook, or seeing how many new followers you have on Twitter, or Snapchat streaks. Anyone use Snapchat? So there's this thing, I don't use Snapchat. So there's a thing where like they keep track of like how many days in a row you Snapchat your friends, and streak. And on an interview, I saw there was kids are like giving each other their passwords, so when they go on vacation, other kids can post for them and keep their streaks going because they don't want to break their streak. The endless scrolling. It's like a slot machine. You never know what's going to happen in the next pull. I heard a report about Instagram not giving you all your likes when they happen, and they'll store them up and then release them at random times during the day in bunches. They keep you wanting to come back for more. And what this is doing is it's hooking into human emotions, the desire to belong, be liked, have connection, human connection, fame. And where this is really a problem is where they're, doing this intentionally to keep you in the app. Which some apps, they're making money, advertising money off of all that screen time. So there's a monetary incentive to quite actually hook you into the app. So this is why we were talking about the ethics earlier. Although I think it changed names, because when you go to time well spent, it redirects to another site.
Center for Human Technology.
Yeah. Center for Human Technology. So I kind of expected when I was putting this topic together, people were like, oh, we're going to learn how to like hook people, or get people addicted. Is this ethical to do this? So again, we're talking about helping people. Now, the rest of this content here, we're running against the end of our time, gets into the technical aspects of behavior management. And we can go as hard into this as you want. More vocabulary. Conditioning means learning. Respondent is reflexive behavior. It's innate behavior. It's things you already do. So respondent conditioning is teaching behavior with the stimulus, as opposed to operant conditioning, in which we're teaching behavior by the consequence of the behavior. You ever go into the bathroom when the light is on, but you turn it off anyways because you have to hit the switch? Yeah, that's the respondent behavior. Okay, and respondent conditioning is called involuntary because these are natural reactions we have, versus voluntary, which is operant, which is behavior. You have to do the behavior in order to have the condition. So motivation to gain reward or avoid punishment. Now in respondent conditioning, we're going to present a new stimulus. So you were talking about Pavlov, who trained his dog. So when he went to give the food, he rang the bell. And so that became paired with the existing stimulus. And then after consistent conditioning, learning, then that new stimulus prompts that existing behavior. This is why aromatherapy works. This This is why mindfulness works. Like a calm word, you have a calm word, or there are things in most of these that have naturally calming influences, like lavender. It's just chemical, and so that's one of the reasons why it's reflexive. It's involuntary. Yes, but then when you get a bottle that's like calming blend, and it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it, there's stuff in there that naturally calms you, and then there's other things in there to flavor it, to give it that experience. So we're adding in a second stimulus. With operant conditioning, we're teaching a new behavior by the use of reward or punishment. Now, these words sound fairly severe, but reward basically means increasing behavior. So with the operant conditioning, we're going to increase behavior by reinforcing it and decrease behavior by punishing it. Punishment basically means it's anything that's undesirable. And there's a negative and there's positive functions. So positive means adding, negative means removing. So you ever heard of positive reinforcement? So positive reinforcement is increasing the likelihood of something occurring by adding something liked. This is the example you were talking about with the floss. So if I floss one tooth, then I'm going to have a celebration. So negative reinforcement is often confused. People think negative reinforcement is something that's negative, but it's actually removing something that's negative. So when you get in your car and you start it up, you hear a
Ding.
Buzzer, dinging, whatever, and you hear that until you put your seatbelt on. So that is negative reinforcement. It's increasing the likelihood of the behavior by removing something that's aversive. That's the make it stop incentive. Same thing with the little bouncing thing on the dock and your computer, little thing that's bouncing is like, make it stop. So the rewards, getting the rewards has to be sufficient. So getting a reward one time, you think that's going to get you to floss all your teeth all the time? So you got to build it up. So there's different ways to do reinforcement. So reinforcing means building the behavior. And it can be done by a frequency and by time. So frequency is known as ratio, time is known as interval, and it can be regular or irregular. So you get a paycheck. When do you get your paycheck? Every 2 weeks, whether you work or not. Fixed ratio is where you do a certain amount. Let's say if you do the project, or you sell 5 whatever, then you get paid.
It's like commission.
That can be like commission, although it can encourage cheating, shortcuts, because you can fix it. The fixed interval, people tend to slack off. So irregular is interesting. Irregular interval and irregular ratio. So to keep people from cheating on the commission stuff is the intervals of change. It'll be like every 3 days, every 5 days. They'll all average out over time to be the same amount of time, but by being variable, it keeps people honest. And what really is the revelation is that the variable ratio schedule is the thing that really gets the human dopamine system going. Slot machine, the Facebook feed. Because you never know what's going to come up the next pull, right? It's like this master combination of being intriguing, and I can imagine it's just there. I just got to check. It could be the next one. Progress bar in a survey is a reinforcement schedule, isn't it? Okay, extinction. Extinction is another behavioral management. Actually, we were talking about extinction earlier. So extinction means diminishing the behavior, making it stop by not reinforcing it. So no longer providing either positive or negative reinforcement. So extinction curve means there's going to be an increase of the behavior when you try to stop it. And you got to really avoid, responding, because you're actually going to enable it more.